This is not a test. This is not a test. I don't know if you can handle it. I don't know if you can handle it. I don't know if you can handle it.
Hey Vault Hunters, and welcome back to another Borderlands 4 video. Today's video is highly requested. We are finally getting to the Vex Trouble build. I know you guys have been waiting for this one because there's not much out there, but with the updates that we got this week and a ton of buffs to Vex and to her red tree, to her trouble tree, it's going to help us output even more damage so that we can keep up with the incarnate build and the clone builds. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys, Trouble is not doing much damage in this build. You can switch it up a bit to have Trouble do more damage and get illusions. However, then it kind of lacks in the bossing department. It's not terrible, but it's definitely not the best option. So I'll show you guys both of those skill setups, but the preferred one that I like to go with is just having Trouble boosting my gun damage, and that seems to work the best. You also have the flexibility to swap around augments on this build depending on what you're doing in the game. So when you use the phase Phamiliar action skill, it's going to teleport Trouble, dealing damage in an area. Trouble then transforms into a badass, fully restoring health and gaining increased damage for duration. Activating phase Phamiliar will respawn Trouble if he's currently dead. Now normally the duration on this is only 20 seconds, but we are going to be going into Grave Sustenance, which gives us missing action skill duration restored every time we get a kill. But in this case, for this build, we are going to be going down to Mortal Terror, which is going to allow us to proc this kill skill on a crit. So we're going to get a lot of duration out of this. So we're going to do a little bit of a live gameplay at this driller site to show you guys the playstyle. So first you want to pop your action skill, obviously, for Trouble. He's going to mark. You can see the little like pink circle there for the mark. And so you're going to want to run around and just kind of follow him. And I will say too, hold on, let me go in my inventory. I will say too that it's really nice to pop on Kill Spring for this. So we're going to just put Enrage on, even though it screws up our firmware. That's fine. But you can use his little circles to kind of like see enemies too, which is really nice. But you're just going to have him out in his action skill. When he's in his action skill, his name is going to be Big Trouble. And you can see that he's pretty dang tanky in this mode. He's going to be just running around marking enemies. Sometimes he doesn't mark the ones that you want, but you can just kind of go around and follow him. And then the orbs are going to come out for Kill Spring, keeping you nice and topped off health wise. But that's basically the gameplay. You want to pop your RepKit every once in a while to get that Enrage, but always remember that you're taking more damage during that. But you should be good with Kill Spring just fully keeping you topped off. For bosses, you want to keep a shock weapon on you and switch from shock to your kinetic weapon that's going to do damage. This is for shocking attunement. Obviously for driller sites, we don't really need that because we do enough damage, but that's going to give you an extra 30% damage. And then with this build, like I said, you can swap around augments if you want, but to keep Trouble nice and tanky and have the maximum uptime for him, we're going to give him the Beast Mode augment, making him immune to damage whenever we are able to hit that command skill. And then he's also going to get a lot of Overshield with Overprotective, which is a kill skill, but we can proc it on crit hits using Mortal Terror. So you'll find that Trouble is pretty tanky, and you could swap up to Vorpal Fang or Hexus Nexus, which is going to give Trouble a chance to critically hit. This is also going to proc your kill skills, so this is a good way to get uptime on that as well. Like I said in the beginning, he's not going to be doing a ton of damage, but he does decent damage, and you want him to be alive at all times so that he can be marking enemies for you for the Capstone Unsealed. Another version of this build that has Trouble doing a little bit more damage is through the middle tree. However, you're going to be taking a lot more damage as well. So it works out in some scenarios, but not all. It's also a little worse for bossing, like I mentioned, because you're not going to have the mark immediately on the boss. right, now that we talked about the playstyle, let's go over the gear. I've already talked about a couple gear pieces, like getting a taser. I really like that for the shock component, for the shock attunement, because you really only need this against bosses. It's not going to be that big of a deal when you're mobbing. However, if you're mobbing, you could use something like the plasma coil or a wombo combo with shock. Those are always good options. If you're a fan of snipers, you could grab a complex root with shock, but those would be my recommendations there. And then for bosses, you're also going to want to find beam tossers. They are my most favorite weapons to use against bosses. They're really good against big hitbox bosses. Think the vault monsters or some of the bigger story bosses like Vile Lictor. They're really good against those guys. If it's a smaller hitbox enemy, you could just honestly use the bod against them, or whatever your pleasure. Obviously the taser is going to do well as well. For mobbing, we are mostly going to be using the bod with the COV mag and the SMG secondary fire. You could also use assault rifle secondary fire. I know this is really difficult to farm. Trust me, I've been farming for days for a COV roll, and I finally got one the other night, so I was so happy I could put this together. The build feels good without it. However, you're probably going to want to mob with something different. I was mobbing with this sniper rifle ammo. I didn't really like it that much. It was all right, but I much prefer something like Mad Lad, something like Hot Slugger, something like Plasma Coil, Wombo Combo. Those felt a little bit better to mob with before I had this particular bod, so keep that in mind. Also, the firmware obviously is going to be different if you don't have a COV gun. I really love the Mad Lad. However, it's pretty bad with the COV enhancement perk right here, where you get 100% critical damage while overheating, because the Mad Lad overheats so quickly. It doesn't stay in that mode for very long, and so you don't get a lot of critical hits off with it. However, I do love the gun just itself. It's really fun to shoot. For me personally, I don't really like the Affinity. It is kind of all over the place. I don't know if that's because I'm using controller or what, but it is another COV option, so you could use that in place of this. Also, it's only fire, which is really bad. And speaking of, let's talk about elemental affinities a little bit. Elemental affinity is the fastest way to do more damage. If you're going up against a shield bar, you want to be using a shock weapon because you're going to get bonus damage. If you're going up against an armor bar, you want to use corrosive because you're going to be doing extra damage. If you are going up against a health bar, you want to use fire because you're going to get extra damage. So for those three elements, shock, corrosive, and fire, you're going to be getting 175% damage, and that 75% bonus is multiplicative, and so it's the best way to boost your damage against certain health bars. So I highly recommend doing this for bosses. For mobbing, it's not as important, but you're going to really notice it if you use a fire gun like the Affinity against an armor bar. It's going to be terrible because you only get 50% effectiveness of your DPS effectively if you're using these against the opposite health bars. So if you're using, fire against armor, like I mentioned, you're not going to be getting very much damage. Now, the reason why kinetic is so good and so powerful is because kinetic is neutral. So kinetic does its full damage amount 100%. It does not get nerfed. It does not get buffed against shield, health, and armor. This is different from Borderlands 3. Borderlands 3, it got some penalties against armor bars. In this game, it does not. It's just 100 across the board. So that's why kinetic is so strong in Borderlands 4 and why it's so good for this build. Not only does it not take any damage hits against different armor bars, but also the skills we're going into are going to give us bonus kinetic and lifesteal and increased kinetic damage. So we definitely want to focus on getting kinetic damage. So if it's not the bod, look into something like I said, like the Hot Slugger or the Mad Lad to get some more kinetic damage. And then also I want to mention that radiation and cryo are pretty decent as well, because they don't get as much of a bonus, but they also don't get as much of a penalty. They only go up to 150 against like radiation against shield bars instead of shock, which gets 175. Anyways, I have a whole video on my channel about elemental affinities if you want to check it out, but that is what's going to boost your damage the most, and I really wanted to call it out in this video because it's really important. All right, let's move on to RepKits. You're going to want to look for order because it has 2 charges, obviously, and look for amp. I like this one because it has amp and overshield. Some of the bosses hit you right out the gate, so it's nice just to get a full overshield. But you could also look for something like amp and enrage would also be a really good one. And then another great rep kit for bossing is war paint. If you're using the bod to actually kill the boss, if you're using the beam tossers, you don't really need to worry about fire rate too much, but it's going to help you get the projectiles out faster, obviously. But the war paint gives you fire rate and movement speed, which is really nice if you're mobbing as well. And then I've got one with extra fire rate on here. You could also get one with enrage, would also be a good one as well. And then for mobbing, I like to use Kill Spring. This is just going to give you healing orbs, keeps you topped off, and keeps your health at 100. And then Enrage obviously is a good one to pair with that, because when you're mobbing, you could just have a little bit of extra damage. Unfortunately, the healing orbs will not heal Trouble. However, if you want to, and I forgot to mention this in the gear section, the support drone on a Tediore will actually heal Trouble. So if you're having trouble, no pun intended, if you're having a hard time keeping him alive, then you could use the support drone to heal him, and it'll heal you as well. It'll chain between the two of you. All right, so that's it for RepKit. You want to look for amp, kill spring, and war paint. Moving on to heavy weapon ordnance. Obviously, you could use a knife if you want to, but we are using the rocket socket that comes in kinetic. You can get this in other elements, but like I mentioned before, we're getting bonuses to kinetic, so we chose this one. It's got increased fire rate, it's got a 2-shot, and it's got 25 in the mag. If you're going against different bosses, you definitely want to match your elemental affinities, like I said before, but this one is nice because it has so much in the mag, and you really can kind of do anything and move around and shoot ads with this. It's perfect for vile enemies. It's really, really good for vile enemies, so I just kind of keep it on the back burner and pull it out when one of those shows up. Moving on to our class mod, you're going to want to look for Teen Witch. This class mod drops from Radix, so good luck. And you want to look for either kinetic damage would be a great one, damage dealt, something that's going to help you out. You always get lifesteal on it. And then you want to look for the most points in that green perk and in the red shield perk. So those skill perks are going to be over here for corporeal. This is going to give you damage dealt while you have overshield. So this is really good if you have a rep kit with overshield on it. We're also going to be getting a ton of overshield with the teen class mod. And then over here to conjunction, it gives you increased gun damage the more full your shield. So when you have overshield, you're going to be basically keeping a full shield all the time unless the amp is using it. So that's a really good skill point. If you get some leftover points, getting some engraved thirst is not bad either, because it's going to give you lifesteal, which helps keep your health, shield, and overshield up when we're using Teen Witch. So it kind of all works together. Teen Witch says when you have max health, your lifesteal partially applies to shields. When you have max shield, lifesteal applies to overshield. So we're going to have a lot of shield, overshield. This build is very tanky, and when we have maximum shield, we're going to be draining it with amp. So the reason why so many people are using amp now on their builds is because amp is multiplicative, and I believe I saw Chadley running Teen Witch with amp originally, so definitely go check his channel out. But it works perfectly together because you're going to be getting shield from the lifesteal and you're going to be doing damage constantly, especially with Trouble. So the amp shield with Teen Witch works really well on clone builds, minion builds for Vex, because you're going to be doing constant damage. It would work really well for like a dot build as well, status effect build, because it would constantly be giving you lifesteal. But for this build, just keep an eye out for amp shields. Now, I've been trying to get a Watts for Dinner amp shield for about a week now. This would be the most ideal shield. This would be the most ideal shield to get amp on, especially if you could get like Siphon and amp. That will probably be the most ideal. You could probably sell it for $1 million shield, because with this shield you do bonus 25% shock damage, which is its own bucket, so it's another multiplier onto your damage. So you're not only getting the amp damage, but you're also getting the 25% shock. So this would be ideal. I have not gotten it yet, so it's not in any of this footage. The second one that's really fun too, and I do have an amp shield for this one, but it's only 50% gun damage. The amp has a range of how much gun damage you get on it. So not only do you have to get amp on your shield, you have to get lucky and get a good roll. I believe it goes up to 200%. I don't know. I haven't gotten more than 100. So let me know in the comments below what amount of gun damage you've gotten on your amp shield. You also want to pay attention to how much shots drain. So this one, they drain 28%. This one, it's draining 20%. So keep an eye on that as well. However, if you're like me, you can't really be picky on what you get on these amp shields. Also, this one's now locked to Deadeye, which kind of sucks. However, the Sparky shield is really fun for ad clear, because it's just going to shock enemies every time you amp it, basically, because the amp is going to take your shield down. So then it's going to shock because the energy shield is not full. So that's a really fun one to look for with amp as well. And then if you can get a super soldier with amp on it, that would be amazing as well, because it's going to give you fire rate. All right, moving on to our enhancement. This one is really important as well. You're going to want to find one with duct tape, a COV enhancement. This is going to give you 100% chance to deal critical damage while overheating. This is going to help us hit our crits without using the knife. Obviously, if you have the crit knife, you could use that instead of this, but this is just going to give us critical damage, guaranteed critical damage, if we can't hit the weak points. And getting critical hit damage is going to be proccing our kill skills. So it kind of all comes for a full circle. The perks you want to look for on your enhancement are gun damage, shotgun damage, any type of specific weapon damage, because if you're using the bod, then it's going to count for that. I like the shotgun damage because when I use the beam tossers, I'm really not sure if it affects the alt fire, but I assume it does. You also definitely want to look for magazine size on these guys, because there's not much magazine size on these bods. There's 10 on this one, and you can get a lot out of for not very much. I had the bullets to spare firmware on here for a while, and it was just a really nice quality of life having that two-piece for the mag size, even just 20%. So I would recommend trying to find mag size on here. And don't forget that if you get like shotgun mag size, sniper mag size, both of those work for the bod, because the bod counts as any of those weapons. And then let me mention the firmware. You want to go with 3 out of 3 for heating up, which is going to give you reload speed, amount of overheated shots before breaking is increased for COVs. Your gun damage is also increased by 25% while overheating with COV. And then secondly, we're going to get a 2-piece high caliber for that gun damage 10%. It's also nice for the projectile speed for your beam tossers. All right, let's take a look at the skill tree. So for red skill tree, here comes Trouble Tree. We've got 5 out of 5 in enchantment. This is bonus kinetic damage, huge in a separate bucket. And in fact, if you don't have Teen Witch, I would highly recommend finding a class mod with enchantment on it, because if you paired that with a shield with amp and siphon on it, that could work really well as kind of like a budget way to do this build. I actually found one with amp and siphon on it earlier, and that would be perfect for giving you overshield and allowing you to keep that shield up. However, just because you have 100% overshield doesn't mean your shield underneath it is all the way up. So it may not be proccing amp as much as it would with like Teen Witch. Just keep that in mind, I guess. But for the second skill, we're going to go 2 into Grave Sustenance. This is a kill skill. It's going to restore missing action skill duration. And you'll see in the green tree, we have Mortal Terror. So our crit hits are going to be proccing kill skills. So we don't have to worry about always getting a kill. We just need to get lucky on our crits. And then down to Overprotective, we're going to get 3 points in here. Now you can kind of play around with these 2 skill points and see which one you need more in. If you're noticing your action skills falling off, you can put more in here. Like if you're doing more mobbing and not as much bossing, because for bossing, you really don't even need any points in here. And then down to here, just see how much like survivability you need and trouble needs. And then you can pop more into here. We're going to have a ton of overshield anyway, but this is kind of just nice to have. And then just a quick note, if this was action skill cooldown rate, I would take a point or 2 into Grave Command, but it's only respawn and command skill. And we're not getting any damage bonuses after command skill because we're not going into Yalombe. This is only 25%, so it's really not that big of a damage boost compared to something like Vorpal Fiends, so I went for a little more utility instead. And then 5 out of 5 Vorpal Fiends, this gives us crit hit damage. This doubles when it goes into the damage formula, so it's 50%, making it a much better choice than Yalombe. It's also up all the time. And then we're going to move down into our bottom branch here. We are going with the right tree branch. I also really like the middle branch. I love the illusions and I love proccing them with Trouble, or if you're using a crit knife, that can proc illusions as well, and then his augment to critically hit with all attacks. So this is a really fun mobbing build for Trouble, but it's not as good at bossing because you can't reliably keep up sacrificial essence. So we go into the right tree instead. So we're going into Shocking Attunement. This is going to give us gun damage while 30% while walking. So we always want to keep a shock weapon on us to switch to, because the attunement stays active for 6 seconds after we swap. So we want to mostly be using kinetic weapons for our damage boosts in the green tree. However, using a shock weapon just to proc this when needed, usually against bosses, like I mentioned in the playstyle section. And then on down to Infusion, this is going to give us bonus damage. So this is in a separate bucket, multiplicative bonus damage when we use a RepKit. We're going to get bonus and our minion's going to get bonus as well. So make sure when you're going to kill a boss, you definitely want to use your RepKit for your amp, but also for this infusion skill as well. And then onto the capstone Unsealed. Trouble's going to mark his current target, causing them to take increased gun damage from Vex. Unfortunately, he can't mark more than 1 at a time, but he's pretty quick at marking them, to be honest. If you have range enemies, you might want to switch to Vorpal Fang instead of Beast Mode. And then the kill skill, when a marked enemy is killed, Trouble gains a stack of Unsealed for a duration, granting health regen and increased damage, which is going to help keep him alive. And then when Face Familiar is active, your action skill, Unsealed effects are doubled. So you're going to get 100% against the marked target, which is really, really nice for bosses because you'll always have his action skill up while you have Unsealed as well. So that allows you to get 100%. And then we've got the health regen for him, the damage dealt for him, and the max stack. All right, moving on to her green tree, we've got a lot of points in here as well. At the top, Leeching Attunement, 5 out of 5. This is going to give us lifesteal and reload speed. Lifesteal is extremely important in this build because it's going to help us keep up our shield and overshield with Teen Witch. And to do so, we have to be attuned to kinetic. So this is why I said we want to always be attuned to kinetic, because not only is it just neutral to all health bars, but we're also going to be getting our lifesteal that way. And then over to Grave Implements, we're going to get gun damage. This is a kill skill, so we can proc it on crit hits with Mortal Terror. This is going to give us gun damage, 60% gun damage with max stacks. Moving down here, you could put 5 out of 5 into Material Components, which will give you 35% kinetic damage. However, I decided to put 3 into Grave Power, which is going to give us an increase to our max stacks. And because we're triggering kill skills off of critical hits, then this is going to allow our Grave Implements to actually double and go up to 6 stacks, which will then give us 120%. So the extra 60% there is way higher than a 35% for kinetic. And it also allows us to put 2 points into Channeling, which increases our action skill duration by by 10%. So now Trouble's going to be able to be in his action skill a lot longer, which is going to help us do more damage. Then moving on to the bottom branch here, we've got 5 out of 5 into Drink Full. This is just increasing our fire rate, which is just a straight up multiplier to our damage. And then 4 out of 5 into Mortal Terror, which gives us a 4% chance to activate kill skills when critically hitting enemies. So you want to make sure you are critically hitting whenever possible. And that is why we're using the COV enhancement in order to get 100% critical hits on that back half of the mag, basically when you're overheating. You can also use the crit knife, of course, if that is your pleasure. But this is how we're going to activate our kill skills. For our kill skills, we've got Grave Implements, which is going to give us a crazy amount of damage. And then over in the red tree, we've got Grave Sustenance. Overprotective are both kill skills. And then our Augment and Capstone also have kill skills. So our Augment extends Beast Mode's duration when we get that kill skill to proc. And then for our Capstone, the kill skill actually gives Trouble stacks of health regen and increased damage. So that's just going to help keep him alive and keep him in beast mode for longer. All right, quickly, let's look at specializations. We've got the best defense, giving us increased damage dealt based on the fullness of our shield or health. Riddle You This is going to give us increased gun damage. We've got CQC for melee damage, grants the Vault Hunter increased fire rate. This counts for Trouble doing melee damage, gives us the fire rate. And then we've got one shot, one kill. Excess damage will be stored and added to your next gunshot. So that's all the synergies that are going on in this build. Hopefully you learned something and I explained it well enough for you guys. I'm really having fun with this Trouble build, actually. I never thought I would say that after playing the build while leveling up. It was kind of lacking in the damage department, but I think we've fully fixed that with the skills that we got going on. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this build. If you try it out, let me know. I'll be streaming tonight on twitch.tv/AbbyHour. We're going to be playing the Trouble build and farming up some legendaries. So I hope to see you there, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.